Hey everyone, it's Daniel. Okay, now we get to the good stuff. The first few videos were about how the SAT and ACT exams work, including how to decide which test to take and when you should take each exam. Now we'll cover some of the most essential test-taking strategies and the bread and butter of what material actually appears on the exams. So in this video, let's discuss some of the best test-taking strategies and other tips to help you navigate each section. This is a great video to watch right before you take the test. No rules, no formulas, just some of the best test-taking hacks, so to speak. This will help save you time and move through the sections more efficiently. And in the next few videos, we'll get to some of the actual material itself. If you find these strategies helpful, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. You can also leave a comment below with which of these strategies you found to be the most helpful. And be sure to hit the notification bell. That way you could be notified whenever I post a new video. I really appreciate your support. Thank you. Now let's get to the good stuff. My students are often stumped when they can't do a math question with old-fashioned algebra. This is where some alternate math strategies can really help you. It doesn't matter how you get the answer, as long as you get it. Let's try one. Joe went to the store where cakes cost $10 and pies cost $5. If Joe spent $250 total and bought 5 more pies than cakes, how many cakes did he buy? Press pause for a moment and give it a shot with algebra. This question could be done algebraically. You could set it up as a let statement or as a system of equations. Both of those approaches, though, could be fairly challenging. So let's try another approach. On a standardized test, one of the answers has to be right. In other words, sooner or later, one of these choices would have to give you $250. So when you have all numbers in the answer choices, a great strategy is to use those numbers and work backwards. You can plug in the numbers from the answers and see which one will give you $250. Now you might ask, doesn't that take too long? No. I'll give you a moment to test choice B. In other words, we're going to assume that he has 12 cakes. Press pause for a moment and try to work out what that would give you. If choice B is right, it means we have 12 cakes. The question also says that there are 5 more pies than cakes. So that means if there are 12 cakes, there would be 17 pies. And we want that to give us $250. Let's see if it does. 12 cakes times $10 each plus 17 pies times $5 each would hopefully be $250. That would be $120 plus 85, which becomes $205. We were looking for an answer of $250, but using choice B, we got $205. So we definitely know that B is not the right answer. But we know something else too. Not only is choice B not correct, but we also know that it's too low. We need a higher number of cakes to produce a higher answer. So not only could we eliminate choice B, but we can also eliminate choice A, since that's a lower number. Now we are left with choices C, D, and E. Many of my students tell me that they should then test choice C, since it's the next higher number. But what we actually want to do is test choice D. Why? Well, if D gives us $250, you're done. It means that's the answer. But if you test D and it gives you a number higher than $250, you now know that the answer is C. It's the only choice that's lower. Or think about it the other way. Let's say that you test choice D and it gives you something less than $250. That means the answer must be E. It's the only choice that's higher. And this is the great thing about starting with choice B. If the answer is A or B, you get it immediately. And from there, you only have to test D. So of the 5 choices, you only need to test 2 of them. Let's give it a shot. Take a moment to press pause and test choice D. If we assume the answer is D, it now means there are 14 cakes. And remember, there are 5 more pies than cakes. So 14 cakes would mean 19 pies. Using those numbers, 14 times 10 plus 19 times 5, and we want it to be $250. That would give us $140 plus 95, which is $235. Again, the answer is too low. That means the answer must be E, and you don't even need to test it. Now, this question could have been done algebraically, and if you can do it that way, great. However, if you get stuck that way, this is a great alternative approach. It might not be what your high school math teacher wants you to do, but it's a perfectly good way to approach a math question on a standardized test. Now, just a side note, ACT math questions have 5 choices. SAT math questions have 4 choices. But you can use the same strategy for both. When the answers appear as all numbers, test choice B. And then if you have to, you can then test D. Let's look at another alternate math strategy. Here's another popular type of question that comes up on the test. The expression 6x plus 2 over 2x minus 1 is equivalent to which of the following? Take a moment to work on it with algebra and press pause. This could be done with synthetic division or long division with polynomials. However, many of my students have never learned to do that, or others have, they just don't remember how. This is where another great strategy comes in. If you see all variables in the answer choices, you can pick your own number. Let's just pick the number 2, because it's simple. Plug in 2. Press pause and see what happens when you plug in 2 to the given expression. If you plug in 2 to the given expression, you would have gotten 14 over 3. Now what? That means if x is 2, the expression would have to produce a value of 14 over 3. You can say that x is 2 and plug that in to every answer choice, and you're trying to get 14 over 3. Press pause and watch what happens. If you did your math correctly, you would see that choices A, B, and C would not give 14 over 3. But if you plugged it in for D, it would. The answer is D. When you have all variables, plugging in numbers is a great alternative approach. Now, when you use this strategy, sometimes more than one answer might come back as working. For example, in the last question, let's pretend that 2 choices came back as 14 over 3. If that happens, you need to pick new numbers and just retest those choices. This is rare, but still, just because an answer works doesn't necessarily mean that it's the answer. You have to test every choice. So just to recap, if you see numbers in every answer choice, test choice B. If you need to, then test D. If the answers are all variables, pick a number and then test the choices. And if more than one works, pick a new number. These are great alternatives to algebra. Again, if you were able to do that first question with a let statement, or that second question by dividing polynomials, great. But if you couldn't, that doesn't mean that you can't answer the question. On a standardized test, there are alternate approaches if and when you get stuck with algebra. The next tip is a great time saver. You don't have to answer the questions in the order that they appear. This actually applies to every section. Let's first see how it works on a grammar section. On both the SAT and the ACT, there are 2 different types of grammar questions. Certain questions just ask that you make a quick fix or edit. For example, the rules tested on the exam are not terribly difficult. They're just not included in every high school curriculum. This is what I'll call a quick fix question. They just want you to fix a word or just a piece of punctuation. Other grammar questions deal with the organization of the passage as a whole. For example, if the writer deleted or added certain information, the essay would lose or gain a sense of blah blah blah. Suppose the writer's goal had been blah blah blah. Would this essay fulfill that goal? So when it comes to the grammar questions, don't answer them in order. Instead, start reading the passage, and when you get to a quick fix question, you can do it. And continue this way throughout the passage. Reading the passage, answering a quick fix. Reading, answering a quick fix, and so on. However, when you get to an organization question, skip it. Keep answering the quick fix questions in tandem with the passage, and then after you finish the passage, then go back to do the organization questions. Why? 1, it's more time efficient. This way, if you run out of time on the final passage, you can at least answer more of the quick fix questions without getting stuck on the longer organization questions. But the other reason why is comprehension. You might only be in the middle of the first paragraph when they ask something like, does this sentence help the overall purpose of the passage? If you're only on the first paragraph, it's too early to answer that question. You don't have enough information yet. So don't feel like you need to answer the grammar questions chronologically. Answer the quick fix questions as you read the passage. Then, after you finish the passage, and before you move on to the next passage, do a second pass and answer the organization questions. This will save you time, and it will help you get a better sense of those organization questions. In a similar vein, you also shouldn't answer the reading questions in order. Somewhere in the reading section will be the paired passage. This is when a longer passage is split into two smaller passages. Two authors will discuss the same topic from a different point of view. You will then see questions dealing with passage 1, questions dealing with passage 2, and then questions dealing with both. No matter where the paired passage is in a reading section, you should always save it for last. Why? Let's talk about the strategy for the paired passage, and then we'll come back to that. When you see the paired passage, you will see it listed as passage 1, passage 2, and then the questions. But don't read them back to back. Instead, read passage 1, and then don't worry about passage 2, go right to the passage 1 questions. After that, then read passage 2. Do the questions that deal with passage 2, and then do the questions that deal with both. The main reason for this is that it will help your comprehension. After you read passage 1, you don't need to confuse yourself with how author 2 feels. Who cares how author 2 feels? Jump to the passage 1 questions while it's fresh in your mind. You'll understand them much better that way. Likewise with passage 2, and answering those questions right after you've read that passage. But there is another reason to follow this strategy: time management. Many of my students run out of time when they are still reading the final passage. This is where this strategy can really help you earn additional points. If you save the paired passage for the end, you can still read the first passage within the given time, and then at least answer the questions for just that first passage. From there, you might be out of time and needing to guess on the questions for the second passage, but by following the strategy, you'll have at least answered the questions that deal with passage 1. This helps many of my students answer at least half of the final passage questions instead of none of the final passage questions. They might now only be guessing on 4 or 5 questions instead of guessing on all 10. This really helps to bump their final score. So, save the paired passage for the end. When you see it, follow the strategy above. It will help you get a better sense of each passage, and it will help you manage the time much more effectively. On both the SAT and ACT, the math questions appear in order of difficulty. In other words, the questions get harder as you move through a section. That's not necessarily question by question, it's just a general trend throughout the section. Therefore, avoid all careless errors in the first half of a section. Each easier question is worth the same as each difficult question. So, rack up on the gimmies. It's far better to take your time and earn all of the easier points at the beginning, and then have to guess on a few tough ones at the end. Granted, if you're aiming for extremely high scores, you'll need to answer some of the tough ones as well. But to see certain score jumps, you don't have to worry about the final few questions. That's not where your points are coming from. Make sure that you're banking the easier points first. Now this gets interesting on the SAT. These sections start with multiple choice questions, but then they switch over to the grid-in questions. These are the questions where you actually have to bubble in your own number rather than picking from a list of answers. For example, in section 4, it will start with 30 multiple choice questions, but then questions 31 through 38 will be grid-in questions. But here's the thing. The questions don't move from easy to hard from 1 through 38. Each type of question is its own set. In other words, multiple choice questions 1 through 30 move from easy to hard. But then when you start the new type of question at number 31, it resets and goes back to easy. In other words, 31 and 32 will be much easier than 29 and 30. Now, I'm not saying don't do questions 29 and 30. If you know how to do them, by all means, go ahead. But don't let them monopolize your time if you're stumped. Put down your best guess and move on to the grid questions. The first few grid questions on the next page will be easier than the last few multiple choice questions. Speaking of those harder questions, I often have to tell my students, avoid the 10-minute approach on a question. Let's see what I mean. The letters M, E, T, F, A, N will repeat in that order forever. Which letter will be the 411th term in that sequence? Press pause as needed to think about it. To answer this question, you could certainly start listing the letters and count all the way to 411. But please don't do that. That's not what this question wants from you. Let's think about this a little more strategically. Let's not count all the way to 411, but let's just pretend for a moment that we're going to. If we were to start counting these letters, watch what would happen to the letter N. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. This cycle will keep repeating every 6 letters. This means that the n will always be a multiple of 6. So after 18, the n would land on 24, 30, 36, and so on. This means that you can jump ahead to any multiple of 6, and you know that that number would have to land on n. So with your calculator, you could determine that 408 is a multiple of 6. This means that the 408th term would be n. And from there, you can just keep counting. M would be 409, E would be 410, and T would be 411. The answer is T. So, if you ever find yourself taking the long approach to a question, see if you can spot a quicker method. And if you can't, come back to it later. When you take the test, keep a careful eye on the clock. And when you get down to just 5 minutes left, try to move around to any quick points. For example, on reading, look for a question that asks for the definition of a word or just a detail from a specific line. In science, try to knock out any of the remaining questions where all you have to do is read a chart or a graph. In math, see if any remaining questions deal with a topic that you feel comfortable with. And in grammar, look for those quick fix questions that we mentioned before. Remember, you don't earn more points by answering harder questions. You earn more points by answering more questions. Try to knock out any remaining quickies. And no matter what, with 2 minutes left, fill out all remaining bubbles. The golden rule of the SAT and ACT, there is no wrong answer penalty. Therefore, you should never leave a question blank. So once you hit the 2-minute mark, fill in the answers for all remaining questions. Now, when you guess, try to do so strategically. This is especially important for the grid-in questions where you could pick any number you want. For example, if they're asking for the value of an obtuse angle, you won't guess something like 20 or 30 degrees. Make an educated guess based on the picture, like 110 or 120. Likewise, if they want the value of a over b, you know that they want a fraction, so don't guess 17. Put down something like 1 over 2 or 3 over 4. It might be a guess, but it's in the realm of what they're asking. Don't just put a random number down. My students find these strategies extremely helpful when it comes to navigating the sections and managing their time. I hope you do as well. Leave a comment below with any questions or thoughts that you have. And be sure to check out my next few videos where I will cover even more material specific to each section. I'll see you next time. And remember, plan your work, work your plan.